So my guess is what we're making in this video today is something unique and different, and maybe even something you've never seen done before. We're going to use my lathe, my laser, and some resin, and we're going to make what I call a mandala bowl. I have this example here that I made as a test, just to make sure the concept worked. This is made from plywood and spalted maple, but today we're going to do this with cherry and walnut. So let's get started.
Before we start, let's take a second to really learn about mandalas. Shed AI, can you enlighten us?
Sure, no problem. Mandalas have come a long way from their origins as sacred symbols in various religious traditions. Originally, they were used in Hinduism, Buddhism, and other spiritual practices as representations of the universe and tools for meditation. The intricate, geometric designs were thought to help individuals focus their minds and connect with the divine. Fast forward to modern times, and mandalas have taken on a whole new life in the world of art and pop culture. Today, they're not just spiritual tools. They've become a creative expression of personal style and inner peace.
Now that we have some background on the history of mandalas, let's take a minute to talk about how we're going to make a bowl from mandalas. What we're looking at here is a piece of cherry, 3/8 of an inch. Now we're going to take our laser and cut our mandala out of it. For our project, one mandala is not enough. We need to go back to the laser and cut 4 more out. Then we'll stack them on top of each other. These stacked mandalas will be joined together with resin, and we'll turn them on the lathe to create this beautiful bowl shape. Enough talking. Let's get this project started. This is the cherry I was talking about before. The laser is cutting out the excess parts of the mandala, so all those little pieces are going to fall out of the bottom. This laser is an X-tool laser. It's 40 watts diode. At our house, we call this laser a Elizabeth sparkle shot. As you watch the laser work, imagine all the little pieces of wood it's cutting out being replaced by resin. That's what's going to make up our bowl blank and what we'll turn. Now that the laser's finishing up, I'm going to reduce the speed of the video to get a slow motion shot of those little tiny pieces falling down. I don't know why, I find that satisfying. So there's the first one. We need 4 more. On the turning, here's the piece of walnut we're going to use for the base. Now, that black circle is a mark for me so I know don't go past that line. It doesn't have to go all the way to that line, but don't go past it. I'll keep making passes until the wood's completely round. I really hope you're not watching this video to learn how to turn. I am not an expert turner. I've only been turning for about a year. I've been turning curious for quite a while, and I was lucky enough to meet someone who taught me the basics and showed me what to do, got me addicted, and then he took me to a wood turning club near where I live, and those people all know so much about turning. That's how I recommend everyone learn. So you can see I moved the banjo a little bit so I can flatten the top here. I'm preparing to make a tenon for the bowl. This little thing lets me mark my different chuck sizes, so I just put it on there with a Sharpie and then I can turn it really quick and it'll mark exactly how far I have to go in for my tenon. So I've grabbed my skew chisel now, and I love using my skew chisel for tenons. I can put it at the right angle, I can get to cut really quick, and everything's nice and clean. Plus, it's so satisfying to see that just peel off like that. And if I want it a little deeper, I'm going to take a little bit more off. Okay, so I've flipped it around. It's in the chuck now, and I have to flatten the bottom that we're going to glue the mandalas to. So I'm just going to turn for a little bit, get that surface nice and flat. So now you're probably wondering, why am I drilling a hole in the base? Well, the mandala has to line up perfectly center on the base. And when I designed the mandala, I put a 12.5 millimeter hole in each one of the layers. This is going to let me line it up exactly on the base, so later when we remount this whole thing to the lathe, it should spin true, or at least that's the hope.
So now we're going to try to tack these pieces on to the base. And we're going to tack it on with super glue. It's a temporary. Later the resin's going to take over completely for us. So I did a couple things. I have these little notches for alignment that I burned in, that I cut out of each of these pieces. And then all these are 12.5 millimeters. So that's a tight fit for us for each layer. So we have the center aligned, and then it's just a matter of spinning until we get the notches lined up. So we start by putting this in, and we got to pull this out so we don't want any super glue close to the center here. So anyway, we'll put a little glue here.
Dude, your glue bottle. Really?
Don't get me started. Super glue and I just don't get along. So as long as I don't get interrupted again, I'll try to explain what's going on here. As I glue each layer down, you can watch me spin it so that the notches line up and try to keep everything perfectly aligned. Unfortunately, because I was at an angle, you can see it's slanted just a little tiny bit, but I don't think that'll bother the final result.
Everything is glued together, it's solid. Eventually we're going to seal the sides and the bottom and the seam with this UV resin here. But before we do that, this part, we have to put something over that. So we're going to cut something out of the laser really quick, cut a hole this big in a piece of wood, and then cut the perimeter of this so we can put that down on top of this to make it so these gaps don't leak. So we're going to get our calipers and measure this. So about 148 millimeters. It doesn't have to be exact because the UV resin will fill the gap there. Quick trip to the laser. We got ourselves what we need. I'm going to slip this around. So tight fit there. And then we will start sealing this box down. So I'm going to get some gloves on here real quick. And this part's messy. I love messy. Messy is the best part of these projects. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is put some in this seam here. I want to have maybe more aggressive than not aggressive. It doesn't matter what's happening on the outside. We just don't want any leaks.
So UV resin is cured with a UV light. That's why you see me hitting it with that flashlight every now and then as I spread it around. What I'm doing is trying to make it so that when I pour the deep pour resin in the center, it can't escape and leak all over my pressure pot. If someone has a better way to do this, I'd love to hear it, because this is messy and tedious sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't even work.
The next thing we're going to do is create a trough so that the resin can be poured up higher than this, because that lets it sink in, and resin gets smaller as it cures. It retracts. So we're going to start at the very bottom of this, and we're going to go all the way around.
So, do you think we should give them a list of everything you're using in this video?
Absolutely. Let's put it down in the description.
Let me guess who's going to write that. I swear humans are so lazy.
Hey, be nice. I'm doing most of the work in this video.
Okay, now we're going to take this back over to the lathe and mount it, and we should be able to put the UV light on it and let it cure for quite a while. Give it some extra time. Even though it's hard to the touch, I want it to really cure. So what I'm going to do is put the lathe on a really slow speed like this, around 50 RPMs. I'm going to turn my UV light on and stick it right under here. And just let that sit for maybe, I don't know, half hour or so.
While that's hardening, we'll go over and mix some resin.
All right, I'm going to use a deep pour resin. So right now I have a scale. I'm going to measure out how much of each one I need. And then I'm going to fill up these solo cups. You see the scale zeroed out for the solo cups. And then pour it into the blank that we made. So let's get started with that.
I'm mixing 2 parts resin with 1 part hardener here.
So to add color to the resin, we're going to use this stuff. It's like a ghost white powder. This is something that's really fun because when the black surface goes behind it, this one turns violet. I have a gold one, a blue one, which the blue one is the one I use for the demo bowl. So now we're going to try this with violet.
You want to make sure you take your time and mix this really well. Funny things happen when resin's not fully mixed.
Let's move over to the pressure pot. So we have our piece mounted in the pressure pot, and we're going to add our resin now. So it's going to take more than 1 cup, but we're going to start with 1.
So whenever I pour resin with wood, I always use a pressure pot. It helps minimize the number of air bubbles. The pressure added to the environment basically pushes those air bubbles up to the surface. Now, something like this, with tons and tons of holes and gaps, it's almost required to use a pressure pot. Once I've filled our blank, I will put the pressure pot on, and this resin will take about 72 hours to cure. I leave a little tiny cup of the resin outside of the pressure pot so I know exactly when it's cured. I can touch it, I can mess with it without having to get into the pressure pot. This second pour really shows how many air bubbles are trapped down in our project. Just one of those bubbles not being able to escape would be a permanent fixture in our final piece.
I just pulled it out of the pressure pot, and I have some bad news. My compressor that keeps the pressure on the pressure pot died sometime during the 72 hours that this thing was in there. So we will see what happens. We're either going to have bubbles as a feature, or all these on top here represent the bubbles that escaped. But nonetheless, it's time to go mount it onto the lathe. We're back at the lathe. I've got the chuck here in the camera frame. Here is our piece. There's the tenon we made earlier. So we're going to put that right in here. And then we're going to take our tailstock and push it all the way in. What we're trying to do is get the shoulder up against the top of the jaw. If you look, this is the shoulder, that's the top of the jaw. And if you look, there's a gap here between the bottom of the jaw and the bottom of the tenon, and that's okay. You actually want that. But why I put the tailstock in to push it up against there is so it's like firm against this chuck jaw. So now that the tailstock's holding it firm there, we can just turn this and you can see the jaws. I don't know if you can see it, but yeah, it looks like you can. My hand gets out of the way. You can see the jaws clamp down on it. So if we turn it some more, I'll undo it a little bit so you can watch the jaws move. So the jaws are going to clamp onto our tenon, force it to be center, and our piece will now move. So we could take the tailstock off,
check it, and then usually I like to turn it and then tighten it again after I have turned it, just to make sure everything is solid. I'm not sure yet how I want the base to be, but I do know this piece of plywood that we put onto the bottom has to go. So when we turn, we're going to turn this side down and then get us into the base so there's no more plywood. Let's get that started.
So when we were making the bowl blank, we put that piece of plywood on the bottom, we put all kinds of UV resin, we used plastic to seal the seams. All that stuff just comes right off as we turn the bowl. You can already see the cherry at the top and the resin in the middle and the walnut at the bottom. As I go, there'll be less and less cherry and more of that pattern will emerge. You can see some of the holes there from the air bubbles that didn't get to escape. I'm going to dig in a little bit further and see if I can get rid of those. I don't know how far down they go. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of them at the top, so we'll see how it goes. Starting to see some shape now with the base. I'm feeling it out, trying to decide what I want it to look like, but a lot of that's dictated to me by where those air bubbles are. I was really hoping to be able to have some solid cherry on the outside at the top, but as I go further and further, I realize that it's just not going to look good because of all the air bubbles that never really escaped. So I think eventually I'm going to take the cherry off completely from the outside of the bowl. So did I say I was a beginning turner? Here you're going to see me make a pretty nasty catch on the resin and see how torn up it looks. It's okay that it happened now because I've got plenty of material still to remove, but those are the kinds of things that are tricky. So I'm going to turn the bowl around here and try to come at that from the other side to clean it up a little bit. When you're turning mixed materials like this, resin and wood, one of them's always going to be harder than the other, and resin is quite a bit harder to turn than wood. When you hit the wood after you've been turning resin, it feels like it's not even there. It's like a hot knife through butter. But when you turn wood by itself, you never get that feeling. It's kind of like how I imagine a baseball player uses those donuts on their bats. They put those donuts on right before they go up to bat, and then when they take the donut off to go swing at the pitch, the bat probably weighs nothing. That's what it feels like in this section here that I'm working on, between the wood and the resin. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with how I've gotten that tear out cleaned up. All those spots are gone. Now I need to go up to the top where all those bubbles are and start to work on that area. As you can see, we've switched to the top of the bowl. First thing I'm going to do is take off all that sea foam that was left over from the pressure pot and then get the top pretty flat. We're almost there. And once I have it down to the wood, I'm going to dig as far as I can until I get to those bubbles and make sure they're all out. Now everything is all flat. It's time to start digging the bowl out. We'll start in the center and go out to the edges, but unfortunately I make a second mistake here and I chip out most of the rim. One thing that you learn in turning is that there are really no mistakes. There's just design changes. So once I get the inside of the bowl turned how I want it to be, I'll go back out to the outside where I've chipped everything out and add a bezel to make it look nice. Now that it's starting to get thin on the walls, you can see that you'll be able to see right through this. But what's neat about the resin is that from some angles, the center parts between the cherry will look like it's purple, and in other angles, it will look completely transparent. That's that ghost resin I was talking about before, and the way it works. So we do have to sand. It's not my favorite thing, and I won't show you how long I sanded, but I will tell you that with the finish that we're going to use, the resin doesn't need to be sanded nearly as much as it would normally. Normally with resin, you sand up to like 5,000. We're only going to 220 with this bowl.
Okay, so now we're over at the finishing station. I am going to use this clear armor wood sealer first, and then this clear armor high gloss second. What it does is it's really similar to UV resin, but it's a lot more viscous. So the wood sealer one will be able to kind of get into the cracks and imperfections and stuff, and I'm turning it on this slow turner. This turns about 6 RPMs per minute, or 6 RPMs. Yeah, so it's really, really slow. And what that does is it lets the finish self-level.
So most finishes you wouldn't apply with your hand like this, but this one's special. It's so viscous that after it's been applied, it will just level itself out. And that's why I'm turning it really slow like this. The other thing that allows it to do this is it won't cure, it won't get hard until you hit it with a UV light. So it'll just stay liquid. And after about 5 minutes turning like this, everything will be perfectly flat.
That's been self-leveling for a while, so let's check on it. It's looking pretty good. So this is the thing that's really nice about this. I just hit it with the UV light, and it gets hard really fast. So unlike UV resin, I guess this is technically resin, but this is like ready to work with just with a little bit of UV light on it. So I'm going to let this run.
Fun fact, when you hit this finish with the UV light, there's some smoke that comes off. I'm not sure if you can see it on video, but look close.
So now when I touch it, it's completely dry, which is really cool. So the wood sealed, so the resin, when I put the high gloss stuff in, it won't go into the wood like it did in the wood sealer. So let's switch to that right now. So again, this is the high gloss wood clear coat, interior clear coat.
So you'll probably notice that there's a big plastic storage container behind this, and I do cover it while it's self-leveling. That's just to prevent any dust from getting down into the finish and being a permanent fixture later.
Let's check to see how the gloss finish is leveled off. Looks pretty good. So we're going to cure that really quick.
With this high gloss finish really showing off the piece, I'm really happy with that choice. Sometimes I wonder between high gloss and matte. What do others think? Can you guys let me know in the comments?
I've got some 400 grit sandpaper. It feels pretty smooth, but I'm just gonna lightly hit it really quick everywhere where I can kind of see something, but just because it's so easy to put another coat on.
So the kinds of things I'm removing now are like little imperfections, little dimples, things like that. Any dust that could have gotten caught in the finish. And then I add another coat. Sometimes I'll do this 2 or 3 times, just depending on how many imperfections there were with the turning. But I did a pretty decent job this time, so I think it's only going to need 2.
All right, let's take a look and see if it's leveled out, and we're ready to cure it one last time. It's looking pretty good. So let's give that a blast of UV.
So this will be the last time we see the turning station in this video. If you're interested in knowing how to make one of these yourself, ask in the comments and maybe I'll make a video.
And this bad boy is ready to go back over to the lathe. We're going to flip it around, put a vacuum chuck on here, and finish up the bottom.
Wow.
The chuck's now mounted securely on the tailstock, and it spins freely. We are now going to push the tailstock into the vacuum chuck and then turn the vacuum on and let that take over for holding it. Then we'll unscrew the chuck and pull it off.
There are lots of ways to finish bottoms of bowls, but vacuum chucks for me are the easiest. I'm going to take the chuck off now, and I'm going to replace it with a pin, and then I'll use that pin with the tailstock to push the bowl up against the vacuum chuck. This basically keeps everything in place. Now I'm going to turn the bottom of the bowl and get rid of the tenon, and even take a little bit extra off so the bowl is slightly concave. You want to do this so that the bowl sits on its rims and is easier to stay on a table. If the wood ever moves in the future and it's not concave, the bowl will rock sometimes. Now you see that little parting tool? I just took the little nib off, and all I have to do now is turn it just a touch to get rid of that extra piece. You notice when I turn that nib off, it slipped a little bit on the vacuum, so it's not spinning quite true anymore, but that's okay. All we have to do now is sand. Sanding is all done. We're going to use the same finish that we used before. You know the routine. You spread it around, let it level by itself, and then hit it with the UV light, and this bowl will be done.
So that's it. The bowl's done. In a minute, there's going to be some close-up shots of it. I really enjoyed making this video. It's the first one I've ever made. If you liked the video too, please hit like so I know that I'm doing a good job. Also, if you saw some things in the video that you didn't like, that turned you off, or you want to see more of, please leave that in the comments for me so I understand how to make a better product for everyone out there. I'm also planning some more sophisticated bowls like this, things that aren't as obvious and probably haven't been done before. So if you're interested in that, subscribe. I've already started working on my next video, and on to the close-ups.